Well, welcome everybody to our next interview in our Spokane GOP series with our candidates, our endorsed candidate. We've got Brandon Casey here with us today, who's running for Spokane County Superior Court Position 8. Brandon, thanks for being with us today.
You bet. Thank you, MJ, for having me here.
You bet. This is just an opportunity for us to get to know you better and for our constituents to find out more about you and why you're running. So, Brandon, first question, tell us about yourself, your background, and why you are running for this position.
Okay. I think probably, so I was born and raised here in Spokane. I've gotten a chance to travel, but I've always been here in Spokane. And my dad was a lawyer, or still is a lawyer, and actually works with my office. So I grew up around law, probably around the time I think it was in junior high. I had to do an essay on what I'd like to do when I grew up, and so I got a chance to interview some of my dad's friends, and the lawyers I grew up around were people who cared about others, and they practiced law because they saw it as a form of public service. And so I always grew up with this concept. It was never in my mind that it was about getting rich or anything. It was always about this is what people, it's a vocation about serving others. So I started practicing as a trial lawyer about 20 years ago. And my dad and I formed Casey Law Offices together in 2004. At that point in time, I had, I think, let's see, we were pregnant with our fourth child, who was born in 2005. And so, I was out on 5 acres between Cheney and Spokane at that point in time. And a couple of years after that, my wife was like, you got to either be a rancher or you got to be a lawyer, but you can't be both. So we moved back into Spokane City proper in 2008, But I've always been practicing here as a trial lawyer. I'm in the court system all the time. That's my focus. I take cases, I take them in the civil arena. Civil justice is something a lot of people misunderstand, but it's a very broad area. And if you think about it a little bit, the O.J. Simpson trial, right? You had the criminal side of things, and then you had the civil side of things. And so a lot of times we might deal with a criminal action that causes hurt and pain to people. And so we're still trying that, but on the civil side about how can we restore lives? And so that can include anything from contracts to, helping businesses, landlords or tenants, individuals who have been hurt, handled several cases where there's been sexual molestation that's occurred. So it's a very broad area. But the key thing is my focus has been being in the court system for the last 20 years. Tried my first jury trial in October of 20, or actually it finished in October. It started in the end of September, finished in October of 2024, or I'm sorry, 2004.
It's your anniversary then, huh?
Yeah, exactly. So, it's just been part of my life, part of my practice, and around that, we've built a business that is meant to try to serve people. And so about 2018, it was, I think about the spring of 2018, I've been working for the Union Gospel Mission on the side, or not on the side, but like volunteering time as part of their legal clinic since I think 2004. Is real close to 2004 is when I started. And around 2018, I had to, we get these emails scheduling us for certain times, and I had to start saying no. And it was because things were so backed up in our court system that I had to focus on the people that were actually hiring me and started to pull back on the pro bono work that I was doing. And I think I assumed initially that that was going to be a short-term deal, that, this was a short-term blip on the radar. And if you look at the statistics, basically in 2015 was when the case filings have pretty much stayed the same over time. They actually decreased a little bit after COVID, but they pretty much stayed around the same numbers that get filed. And so that's cases entering the system. And around 2015, which was really when Inslee started this appointment process. I didn't know this, of course, at the time. You start to realize things afterwards. But the cases that were staying in the system and not getting resolved just started increasing, increasing, increasing. And so I started to see this in my cases, and it was hurting my clients. And so I became real focused on how can I help my clients get through this system faster. Then of course, when COVID hit, it was like there was a whole nother problem because the courts were shutting down, starting back up, shutting down, starting back up. It was really frustrating. My paralegal was pulling his hair out because, we were rescheduling trials on a case. If I could kind of explain what it's like, setting up and getting a trial ready to go is a little bit like planning a wedding, you
Oh
know.
boy.
So if it cancels last minute, it's like you still got a lot of work to do. You might have the flowers already picked out and stuff, but it's like there's still a lot more to happen. You got to reschedule when witnesses are going to appear. There's a lot to do every time you have to reschedule. And on some cases, I had rescheduled things 5 times within a 2-year process. So it was a lot of work that was occurring, a lot of disorganization. And so, yeah, COVID did play a role, but this was already started well beforehand. So we get we get past some of the COVID stuff, and there were things a lot of people don't know about. Like I was being told, and I did get the vaccination because I was being told I wasn't going to, my clients weren't going to get their trial unless I got a vaccination. And so, there were a lot of things that were going on around that time that, kind of raised additional concerns for me. Um, and so we get past 2022, and actually in October of 2022, I was down in Walla Walla for a full month long trial of a case that was filed in 2013, you
Oof.
know. Yeah. And it was a family, it was actually a husband and wife who had a small business, and their property had been taken by by Esota County. And there had been promises made about keeping their business driveway open and all this other stuff, and none of that came to fruition. And so there's this husband and wife who their kids were part of working the business. Well, I got shut down after a couple of years of obviously not having access to their business. They had to close that. And then their kids ended up growing up and getting jobs elsewhere. So, really a death of a dream.
Yeah.
And I got back to Spokane, and I saw that there was this new judge appointed to my cases. I didn't know who it was, and it was Judge Pullen. And I really didn't know anything about her. Of course, you kind of look up and try to see what their past experience was, and I discovered that all she had done was civil commitment work in defense of sexual predators. And that doesn't have any specific bearing to most people, but for a lawyer, what I know is that means she spent most of her life working in the special hearing area. In other words, she's not having this breadth of context of understanding. Now, in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, anytime I have a hearing, she may not understand which civil procedural rules are necessary. I'm going to have to do a lot more education. Well, by around May of 2023, and this is also something most people don't know, is after a judge gets appointed, if nobody files against them in the next May filing time period under our Washington Constitution, they don't even go on a ballot. They're just automatically considered elected, right? And so by the time she's considered elected, um, uh, it, I'm getting feedback from a lot of other civil attorneys that she's done things like just dismiss cases without good evidentiary hearings, a lot of different things like that. So I affidavitted her from my cases, which means I just, you get one chance to affidavit a judge and say, I don't know, I don't think I can get a fair trial in front of this person and get them off your cases. At this point in time, I'm not even thinking about running for judge. Now, I've been asked for a few years to run for or to look into that. I just had been so focused on my clients and like I said, that focus, the service. That's really a big part of why I do what I do. I love my people. I love when I say my people, my clients, my staff. It's a passion of mine. And so I went ahead and at that point in time felt concerned. And then there were additional appointments coming up that I felt concerned about. Um, and around August and September of last year, had more and more lawyers that were coming to me saying, hey, over the last few years, you've been trying to get us to run for judge. Uh, why don't you stop complaining and run? And at that point in time, I was just, and just for everyone's knowledge, no offense, but I, God is a big part of my life. Prayer, making sure I'm following what I feel like I'm called to, is a big part of my life. And so I just said, I gotta pray about this and really see if that's where I'm being called to, because if I'm just doing it in my own effort, I don't feel like that's a good thing to do. Um, so I had a trial coming up in November of last year. It was a 2.5 week trial. And so I just decided I was going to wait until the end of then to decide what to do. In the meantime, I went to what I thought was going to be um, a Halloween party, October 26th of last year. And I told everyone I can only be there for an hour because I'm preparing for trial. And so that hour was up and I was just about ready to leave. And my bunch of lawyer friends, about 9 of them, gathered around. And they're like, okay, you're running for judge, right? And I'm like, I have not decided yet. And I was kind of looking around, I'm like, are you guys all talking behind my back, And
Wow.
and so, we had a really good conversation. I didn't get out of there till 1 a.m. in the morning, but it was good. And it really did weigh on my heart, especially when I was in trial over the next few weeks. Um, and we have a lot of good judges that just, well, I want to say judges with good hearts, but they don't have the experience in the system that have been appointed. And what, and I'm not going to say names, but 2 people who had been on the judicial committee talking with the lieutenant governor were the people that talked to me earlier in the year and said, we don't think he's really listening to us about what's good for Spokane County.
Mm.
And so about mid-December was when I really felt like that. I don't know, inside my heart just felt like this is what I need to do. You know,
Yeah.
this is important to our community. I love our community. It's where my kids are. It's where my family is. My 4 generations of Casey's have been here. My grandpa opened a store up in Hilliard back in the 30s, so I have this feeling, this deep sense of care about Spokane, and Spokane County. And so I just felt like this is what I needed to do.
Yeah.
And I hope that answers the
Yeah,
question,
it
but do you have any
does.
follow-ups?
Yeah, no, it's awesome. And it actually answered the second question I had, which was, why should citizens vote for you over your opponent? And so I think you covered that really well. Obviously you feel like this is a calling and you have, I said this the other day, Casey cares, and that's very fitting as people can hear. So Brandon, in your view as a judge candidate, how do you perceive the structure of your role within the constitutional system, and how do you tend to fulfill your responsibilities accordingly or judge your cases accordingly?
Well, there's really two roles that I don't know if a lot of people out there understand about what judges do. Well, and maybe even three, but I consider two parts to one of those roles. One is the administrative process. So the Spokane Superior Court, it's made up of 13 judges, and it used to be 12 up until January of this year. Now there's 13. And those 13 judges actually make up a legislative body that actually does things like form court rules, and they direct how that court system operates, the efficiency of that court system. And that's a really important role that a lot of people never know about. They don't understand it. It is determinative of whether cases are going to be on time or not. Now, that portion is like it's kind of like they run a business called the Spokane Superior Court, and you have 13 partners that are part of making sure that business runs effectively, So in addition to that, then you have the actual judge in their department, which you'll oftentimes see a courtroom and it'll have a department number on it. And that's where they run their own docket. And in amongst the 13 judges, they determine, okay, this judge is going to sit on this kind of docket or this kind of docket, and it's all determined. And then there's committees that are part of the role as well, but I consider that more on the administrative side of things. So there is the role as judge handling cases. And I think what's really important, and I think it's missed quite a bit, is every time a judge is making a decision, it needs to come through the lens of saying, I'm trying to effectuate the constitutional mandates first. Our laws then are passed based on trying to effectuate that. And so I have literally had judges say to me on things like, we have a strong constitutional right to control what happens with our body, and talking about like the vaccine type stuff, right? Um, you know, it forcing people to take vaccines, that has to be viewed, and so I'm a little bit limited as a judicial candidate to not try to give what somebody might consider a preemptive ruling. Okay. But I can tell you what principles would be important to me is what is the constitutional basis for any proclamation or law that would require people to be vaccinated. That would need to be scrutinized. I can't just say, oh, this law exists, now I'm going to enforce this law. You have to look at it through the constitutional lens first. And so when I'm there in the court and a Superior Court judge, who is the first court that's going to hear those issues, and then what most people don't realize is the Superior Court hears those issues, a transcript, all the evidence is heard in the Superior Court. So issues are framed, evidence is assessed in that Superior Court system. If it goes up on appeal, the Court of Appeals only looks at what that Superior Court judge viewed. They don't hear new evidence. They don't have a different trial, and only if the Court of Appeals thinks they don't have enough information to make a decision, they remand it back to the trial court. So that Superior Court judge is actually extremely important for all sorts of reasons, but the primary thing is making sure that the law and facts that are going to be heard later on are fully explored and fully heard.
Yeah.
Um, Well, when a Superior Court judge says, well, that's a nice constitutional argument, Mr. Case, you're going to have to take that up to the Court of Appeals. I feel offended. That is very offensive to me because it's that Superior Court judge's first line of defense for our
Mm.
constitutional rights. Um, and it's I just saw something earlier this morning. Yakima Superior Court is getting sued by the ACLU today. The and part of the reason behind that is there are people that aren't getting speedy trials. They're not getting what they need, and it's part of that court administrative system.
Yeah.
And 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 the consequence to that, when we look at it, is the courts need to either constitutionally let that person go. You can't keep on holding a person, without the due process, right? So you got to let that person go. They may have been charged with heinous crimes, but they still have constitutional rights because they're not found guilty yet, right?
Right.
And so constitutionally, you got to protect their rights until a jury determines whether they are guilty or not. And those judges need to be very proactive, at least in my opinion. Judges need to be very proactive in how we are actually looking at things constitutionally. This is not just a matter of applying the law. It is about applying the law, but it has to come through that constitutional lens.
Yeah, that's
Uh,
so important, and so appreciate you pointing that out and sharing, your views on that. So, another concern of a lot of citizens is how, as a judge, would you balance crime victims' rights and the rights of defendants and ensuring judgments are fair?
Okay. Well, the nice part about this is judges don't have to, oftentimes, most of the time, don't have to make the decision. It's the jurors make the decision as to whether a defendant is guilty or not guilty. So what the judge is supposed to do is, and most people also don't know that we have a constitutional amendment. I think it was passed in 1989. That actually states what crime victims' rights are to be participating in the system. What I worry about is how I've heard some judges talk about the fact that they don't think it's good to allow victims of crimes to be involved in the process. Well, there's a constitutional right to be involved in that process.
Yeah.
It there is a little discretion that's allowed within that constitutional amendment for the judge to say to balance things and say, okay, if allowing this victim to be involved in the process is going to injure the defendant's rights, then the judge can balance that. But what I've seen or heard is uh basically some judges taking that too far and saying, well, I'm just not going to allow that person to be involved because I think it's too hard on that person. No, they have the right to be involved. That is a constitutional right under the Washington Constitution. And again, if I go back to my constitutional lens, it's, they always have the right to be involved in show up for hearings, be involved. They don't have the right to be disruptive in court. And again, until somebody is actually convicted, that person is innocent, right? And so until a jury determines that that person is guilty, I don't need to try to assess them as if they're guilty. The idea is about protecting everybody's rights, which we go back to a constitutional lens and we say Article 1, Section 1 says the primary goal of any part of our government, including a judge, a Superior Court judge, is to protect and maintain individual rights. And
Right.
so my goal would be just to protect and maintain the rights as people move through the system, both the victim's rights and both the defendant's rights. And then if that person is convicted, there are laws set up on sentencing guidelines, and that is part of we move into a different area. Now, sometimes the jury determines sentencing things like whether it's life or death. That's up for the jury to determine. But when a judge makes that decision, I think now we kick into a different analysis about accountability. And one of the concerns I have is sometimes in that accountability phase of the case, there is some speediness that well, there is a lack of attention paid to some things like prior convictions.
Mhm.
Um, so without going into any detail on something that might seem like I'm giving a preemptive ruling or preemptive opinion about rulings, I think it really is important to look at the person who has been held as guilty and say what kind of accountability fits best to try to help this person. And kind of going back to values that I have is uh, people, our accountability system gives people an opportunity to change, right?
Right.
To go ahead and uh, become better people, but not if we don't allow that accountability to take place. And I think there is such a thing as false compassion, where it's like it makes us look good to try to be nice, but it's not really kind. And I go to like a doctor applying the knife and doing surgery is not nice, right? But they're as kind as they can be in that process. And that is one of the things I think is important about accountability is we can be kind and not nice.
Yeah.
And that kindness actually gives people the ability to change. Say it's somebody who committed burglary, that person probably was not thinking about how that created a sense of violation for the business or the house, the property owner. I've had my house broken into, and the sense of violation I felt from that was horrible.
I bet.
And I think there's an accountability system that allows a repair in our society, but not if we're not allowing that accountability to occur.
Right. If we're just enabling the same behaviors to continue, that is not compassion at
Yeah.
all. And we're hearing that a lot from our business community downtown. Brendan, to wrap this up, I wanted to ask you, final comments that you might have to our constituents. And before we started recording, we were talking a little bit about the homeless supposed conversation that you were part of last night. I was wondering
Yeah.
if maybe you could kind of share your perspective as part of that, because that ties in to what you're just talking about. And you've seen firsthand, what is happening downtown. So final thoughts to our constituents, and maybe, tie those comments in as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll give kind of two parts. That one will be my role, my hat as a business owner, and the other one would be as a potential judge. Um, and I'll do the judge one first because I do think it's an important role that judges play. The National Center for State Courts came in and looked at Spokane Superior Court in December of 2023, so less than a year ago, 10 months ago. They produced a report in March of 2024 about what was going on in our current court system in Spokane Superior Court. And one of the things that stood out, in addition to the fact that we have 24% of our criminal cases that are not being held within, so I should add a little background. Because Article 1, Section 10 requires justice without unnecessary delay by our courts, there are standards that are set up for each kind of case about how much resolution needs to occur within a certain time period.
Right.
So, for example, 100% of family law cases should be completed within 18 months. Now it gives discretion for judges to say, okay, this one we can resolve quicker, this one, but within 18 months. And that makes sense because you could be dealing with custody issues.
Yeah.
And 18 months for a child is a long period of time, right? Not just for the parents, but for the child. That's a long period of time. A 4-year-old becomes 5.5. They're moving into kindergarten by that time.
Yeah.
So there are these standards that are set up to make sure we are following the Constitution. One of those standards is that criminal cases are 100% are supposed to be resolved within, I think it's 100%. It's pretty close to 100% of criminal cases resolved within 9 months. Well, according to this National Center for State Courts, 24% of the cases are over 12 months.
Wow.
That's a quarter of the cases are not even close to fitting our constitutional standard. And the reason the National Center for State Courts used 12 months is because the national standard for speedy trials is 12 months. So they kind of gave us some grace and said, we're still a quarter of the time not even meeting the national standard, you know.
Mm.
So one of the things that's important is our courts also hear what's called Involuntary Treatment Commitment Act cases. Without getting into all the details, just, let's say our police officers, they see somebody who looks like they're a danger to themselves. And if you're in downtown Spokane like I am, you will every single day see people out on the street that look like a danger to themselves. They just don't, they're on drugs or they're mentally ill. I rarely walk out the front door of my building, which is in the Paulson Center, without somebody screaming at no one about something, and it looks like they're going to get into a fight with a ghost.
Mm.
And so the police officers are picking these people up. They go in for a mental health evaluation, and then through that mental health evaluation, a petition is filed with the Superior Court to determine whether they should be involuntarily committed. So last year in 2023, that was 2,444 petitions. So 2,444 people were determined to need the court's decision on whether or not these people had to have treatment. The courts heard about 313 of those cases.
Mm.
And the National Center for State Courts said that was because these cases were getting bumped, continued 7 to 9 times. They're just not being heard. That means you have 2,100 people that could have been helped by our courts, by our judges, that just were never helped. And we're only talking about 2,444 people, and the amount of people that the police really try to take in and get evaluated is much greater than that. We're talking about that's a small portion, and it's not happening. And it really breaks my heart because there's so much that can be done for our community if the judges are now. The National Center for State Courts identified multiple problems in the system, and then that goes back to that 13 judges saying, "Here's how we're going to run the system."
Yeah.
And we need advocates on that board of 13 people that's going to say, "Hey, here's how we can make sure this gets done." Now, how that affects me as a business owner is different. Not way different, but now you got a picture behind why things are ongoing, because the police can only do so much.
Right.
And it's funny because I saw Billy Baldwin a couple of weekends
Yeah.
ago,
Yes.
and he was actually advocating, because the court system is so slow and they're not dealing with this problem, that we should move that to police officers and firefighters.
Oh, wow.
I have a son who's who's a police officer, and putting on him that extra burden is more than we should ever do. Our courts really need to do their job, right? The police officers are already doing their job. The firefighters are already doing their job. But it's got to be tiresome. In fact, I do know that, talking with police
Right.
officers, it's tiresome. So they do their job and nothing happens.
Right.
That's discouraging. So as a business owner, I feel the discouragement because I have clients that don't feel safe coming to my office downtown in the Paulson Center, which is a beautiful building. It's and Lisa Dowers, who runs the office, who runs the Paulson Center, she has done a lot of hard work on trying to really protect the building and take care of the stuff. But there's only so much a property owner can do. And so I know a lot of people have left this area downtown, a lot of business owners. And so as a business owner, I went to the city council roundtable, second roundtable, on some of the measures they wanted to pass, and tried to give some input, again, as a business owner, not as a judicial candidate. And my concerns as a business owner is that one, some of the propositions they had, I'm looking at, like, so you don't want to allow, like, one of the propositions was for them to say people should be able to apply without giving an address, right? And then if it turns out they can't give you an address because they're homeless, then you could be held. That's illegal conduct, right? Uh, well, as a business owner, I can be held accountable for that
Mm.
because I've got all these forms I got to fill out for every employee. So we could be getting applications by people who just as that don't really aren't interested in even getting a job here, but just because it could lead to some benefit for them in the future. The other one
Wow.
was trying to make homelessness a protected class, which to me, as a lawyer who has handled Washington law against discrimination cases, WLAD cases, um, I I have a problem with because as a lawyer, I think there is a good reason for protected classes because the protected classes include things you can't change, like your sex, your gender, the color of your skin. Um, I suppose you could change religions, but you have a freedom, a constitutional freedom, a right to have freedom of conscience, and so that shouldn't be discriminated against. But changing it to a transient condition that people do have choices over, that concerns me. And then I look at it as a business owner in downtown Spokane, and I think, a lot of people I know who've moved out to say the Valley to get away from some of because there's extra expenses living downtown Spokane to try to deal with the problems
Right.
in downtown Spokane. And so, it suddenly, it it becomes something I have to worry about,
Yeah.
and so if I become judge, I have to not abandon my business, but I have to give up everything about this business onto somebody else. That means somebody else is going to have to take over these problems. And I'm looking at that going, that's harsh. Does Casey Law Offices move out to the Valley, because, and I just don't think that's good for Spokane. Again, my heart is for Spokane as a
Yeah.
whole. And now, personally, some of my experiences are, and I don't mean to offend anyone, but I can show up in my parking lot, which, there's a bank drive through in the parking lot I park in. So there's cameras up, right? But I will see people exchanging foils for money. I will see acts of prostitution. I mean, just out in the open there. One day, as I pull up, this mom with her kids pulls up right next to me, and I just got out and I'm like kind of trying to cover the windows because I mean it's like this is craziness just
Wow.
out in the open like this, and or things like human feces right in front of the main doors or just whatever else. I mean, they've dealt with the problem mostly. Lisa's done a great job, I think. But at one point in time, there were people just camping out in front of the front doors. You couldn't even get through the front doors because there
Wow.
were tents and stuff.
Yeah.
So they've dealt with a lot of that, but a lot of that's also been an expense to the people here in this building because we have to pay for additional security measures. And all of that is just a burden that I
Yeah.
don't think a lot of the bureaucrats realize because they don't have a small business.
Yeah.
They don't have a business that feels the realities of those things. And I'll add one more thing in. I do think that one of the things that gives me an advantage over my opponent is her job beforehand, she was getting paid by the state to defend people. Um, that's a big difference. That's kind of an employment by the state position. I have to be responsive to the economic needs, that I'm experiencing. And I don't think most people coming from bureaucratic positions into bureaucratic positions understand you have a problem. If you don't solve that problem, there is harm that occurs.
Yeah.
You just go to the commissioners, ask for more money, and not have a plan. It doesn't, because the taxpayers pay for that, right? And as a business owner, you look for solutions in ways that are effective. If it turns out your plan isn't working, you look for a new plan. You're constantly looking for the solutions that are most effective because you go under if you don't.
Right.
You
Yeah.
can't just go back to the state and ask for more money. You don't get a. So, I have 20 years of that habit already built into me. And a 20-year habit's not going to go away,
Right.
just because I enter into a bureaucracy. I'm going to keep on looking at it from that perspective that this is serving the community by trying to create solutions that are efficient, effective for the people we serve. And I do think the courts have to start serving the people.
Yes, for sure. Well, this has been great, Brandon. Thanks for sharing with us, your background, your why, your passion. Clearly, you are very experienced, not just as a trial lawyer, but also as a business owner and what the challenges are of our community. Brandon, where can people go to find out more or to support your campaign?
Caseyforcourt.com, which is CASEYFOR COURT.com. So
Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you again.
thank you.
Everyone, please go to caseyforcourt.com. Support Brandon Casey. He obviously clearly is the judge that we need in our Superior Court. And make sure to get out and vote. These are nonpartisan positions. So a lot of people don't know how to vote, right? Especially for our judges. And that's one of the reasons why we're doing this is to help people be better informed. So share with your friends, to look up Brandon Casey, to watch this interview and get that information out there because it really can make a difference in our community. Brandon, thank you again for being with us today
Thank
and best of
you.
luck. We appreciate you running.
Thank you. Appreciate it.